Shining, a novel turned into a film. Stephen King, the king of horror, and Stanley Kubrick, the brilliant director. Ever since he was a child, Stephen had shown a certain interest in all that concerns the unusual and the mysterious, in short, in what he defines the dark side of man. He was a passionate reader, and college helped him pursue his interests. He attended creative writing classes, which disappointed him since the traditional teaching and the strict rules required for the essays completely bottled up his imagination. He felt very differently about the literature classes, where he studied many of the authors that would influence his writing career. Thomas Hardy, Jack London, William Faulkner, Edgar Allan Poe, Ernest Hemingway. In 1968, during his first year at college, he wrote his first novel, Getting It On, which later became Rage, the first book published under the name of Bachman, his pseudonym. 1 year later, King conceived the idea for the Dark Tower series, where he combines the westerns of Sergio Leone with the fantasy genre of Tolkien. His university experience definitely confirmed his desire to become a writer. After marrying Tabitha in 1971, the publishing of his new book, The Running Man, was rejected, and Stephen took refuge in the writing of Carrie. And even if he thought he would never become a writer, his life completely changed within a short time. Carrie was the start of a long love story between Stephen King and the cinema. Since then, more than 100 films, both movies and TV miniseries, based on his books and stories, have been produced. Some of the greatest directors in the world, like Stanley Kubrick, David Cronenberg, and Rob Reiner, have directed wonderful films based on King's work, and attracted many of the most affirmed Hollywood actors like Jack Nicholson, Tom Hanks, Samuel L. Jackson, and Christopher Walken. The multimillionaire industry, born of the collaboration between Stephen King and the cinema, makes us realize that not only he is a good and famous writer, a cultural icon, but, as Tony Magistrale affirms in his Stephen King America's Storyteller, also a versatile artist with the capacity to create novels and stories so compelling and convincing that they can easily be adapted for both the big screen and TV. King creates memorable characters with specific characteristics, often inspired by the human prototype, in which we can all identify ourselves, at least in part. During a vacation, the King stayed at the Stanley Hotel, and it was from here that Stephen drew inspiration for the plot of The Shining, published in 1978. In this book, we can recognize several autobiographical references. Jack Torrance, a frustrated writer, is obsessed with writing the novel that will lead him to success. He is an alcoholic, violent, and psychologically unstable. Probably very similar to how King felt during that period. The plot of The Shining is rather linear. Jack Torrance accepts a job as a winter caretaker and moves up to the mountains of Colorado to the Overlook Hotel with his family. Isolation and strange happenings will lead him to madness, inducing him to kill his family. Jack is an aspiring writer who is trying to rebuild his marriage and career, both of which have been pretty much ruined by two traits inherited from his late father: alcoholism and an explosive temper. Jack is the one transformed most by his experience at the hotel. Jack was not only an abused child. His experiences with his father are conjured up when he breaks Danny's arm, but also a drunk, an abusive teacher, and a neglectful husband. The story mirrors, at least in part, the one of the Dr. Faustus, where a man sells his soul to the devil for power and knowledge. Jack, too, is greedy for knowledge. He wants to write his novel to get even with life, and when he finds the overlooked album, he understands that the hotel is giving him knowledge, a forbidden one. Danny goes through a different process. Danny's fight with the monster of darkness has some similarities with the journey of mythological heroes. The hero's special abilities determine his destiny, and Danny receives information about the coming nightmare long before arriving at the Overlook. Mythology grants heroes with strength to match the horrors they have to face, and amulets against the dragon forces he's about to pass. Whatever the results are, children are often the only moral survivors of suffering in King's works. Thanks to characters like Danny, we notice that while King leads us into the nightmare of the Overlook Hotel, what we remember from that journey is not so much the darkness, but the light. Not many film directors possess a conceptual talent, a talent to make every film they direct into a cinematic concept. It is the skill that goes beyond the simple photographing of a script, and the conceptual talent that most distinguished Stanley Kubrick. Almost every film Kubrick directed required the construction of a new concept. He was a filmmaker who resisted the customary critical approach that tries to distinguish strongly linked themes in a director's work. Torrance's frightening metamorphosis from family man into slayer, from failed artist into crazed X-Man, helps the dynamic impact. Possessed by malign forces, he obeys their homicidal encouragement. Kubrick and King were a good match. While King's plot was a supernatural soup of horrific elements, it could accommodate Kubrick's own reflections of human evil, nature's determinism, and man's regression and rebirth, big subjects for the subtext of a horror story. But their differing opinion about what evil is, King was not exactly enamored with Kubrick's adaptation of his story, and went ahead making his own TV miniseries adaptation, transformed King's horror story into Kubrick's philosophical fantasy, and changed the focus from man's extinction to man's immortality. After 36 years, The Shining remains one of the best and known horror movies of all times. Kubrick translated King's The Shining into an authentic incarnation of the evil, eliminating from the novel any element of hope and trust in humanity. The madness, the isolation, even the afterlife are treated with great care and intent. Therefore, Jack has always been the keeper of the hotel, just as the colleague Delbert has assured him. And the terrible lesson seems to be that the evil always existed, and it always will.